great debate of our time is about trade, specifically global trade. Those of us who were in Seattle wondered whether we were in Babel. Similarly, the Senate and the House cannot agree on this single trade bill. For over 1 decade, the United States sustained a trade surplus with the Caribbean, quite unlike China. For every dollar of Caribbean exports to the United States, 80 cents is spent on goods and services bought from the United States. The Caribbean exports $10 billion worth of apparel to the U.S. each year. If there were to be a reduction in Caribbean exports, U.S. retailers would be affected and Americans will lose jobs. The Caribbean exporters also argue that the industry is important to the economies of the Caribbean. In their view, expansion rather than contraction is needed to guarantee growth and stability. We have in our studios 2 very knowledgeable guests with whom we will discuss this burning Caribbean trade issue. Robert E. Scott is an international economist attached to the Economic Policy Institute, EPI, a well-known think tank here in Washington, D.C. He is a former university professor and the author of several publications, including Caribbean Economic and Trade Issues. We also have Ann Hoffman, attorney at law. She is the legislative director of UNITE, Union of Needle Threads, Industrial, and Textile Employees. She is also the author and co-author of several publications. Robert and Ann, welcome to our program today. Robert, I'll start with you. Can you explain to our audience a bit, why is it we need another trade bill for the Caribbean when we already had the CBI? Wasn't that sufficiently successful that we need to have another trade bill?
Well, Paul, it depends on your point of view. The CBI has existed since 1983. It was created by President Reagan to expand trade with the Caribbean and with Central America. There are 26 countries in total involved in the CBI. The question is, that came up recently, is whether or not those countries have been injured by the creation of NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, a special trade area involving the U.S., Mexico, and Canada. The Caribbean countries claim that they've been injured by increased U.S. trade with Mexico. So
yeah,
that's
because
the question.
one of the contentions there is that with the benefits that goes to Mexico, that a lot of the industries in the textile and so forth, which were in the Caribbean Basin, have moved to Mexico, and so consequently we have lost in the Caribbean a lot of jobs and a lot of income.
That's correct.
Is that correct?
That is the argument, but the facts don't support that argument. In fact, apparel imports from the Caribbean and from Central America have continued to grow, even after NAFTA. They were growing at about 20% per year. And of course, apparel is the most important product that's coming from the Caribbean.
So is there a dispute about statistics here? Some people alleging that there has been a reduction in growth, and other information which is pointing towards that there's been an increase?
That's correct. And in fact, at the heart of this dispute is a question over the tariff rate that is charged on U.S. apparel imports from the Caribbean. On average, it amounts to about 5%, which isn't very much. But in percentage terms, and it doesn't make a big difference when you're deciding whether to locate an apparel plant in El Salvador, say, or in Mexico, but it adds up for those apparel companies. And there's just a few apparel companies that stand to earn hundreds of millions of dollars in benefits.
Who own these companies, these apparel companies? Caribbean
companies such as FTAA and Levi Strauss, and I think Fruit of the Loom also.
Fruit of the Loom and Sara Lee are the 2 big
so really Caribbean companies do not own these industries? They're foreign industries located in the Caribbean which produce these goods and sell them to the United States. Is that
I think there may be some firms, some local firms involved, but they're producing on contract for these big U.S. apparel
subcontractors sort of.
Exactly.
I see.
Yes.
Now, why is it we need this Caribbean, specifically this present bill? What is new about it as different from the CBI that we had before?
Well, as I said, under the CBI bill, apparel from the Caribbean countries came in at a reduced tariff, averaging about 5%, versus about 15% for all U.S. apparel imports. And many of these countries also qualified for a special exemption from all quotas, so they could ship as much here as they wanted to under a special program known as the GAL. Getting a little technical here, but it's called the Guaranteed Access Levels. And that's been applied, I think, to a number of the larger producers, particularly in Central America, and I think in Haiti and perhaps in Jamaica as well. No, not Jamaica, but to a number of the largest producers in the region. And so that's been an attempt to lift the quotas. The claim has been that, again, Mexico pays no tariff after NAFTA. Products coming from the Caribbean pay 5%, and so the firms there have claimed that this hurts them, and so that they should be given the same treatment as Mexico. That's the claim.
And you are a legislative director, and you've been doing some work on the Hill regarding the bills. Just walk us through a bit. Tell us what bill was really passed in Congress, what bill was passed in the Senate, what is the status now of the Caribbean trade bill? Is it going to pass, not pass? What is the situation?
Well, I'll leave out the crystal ball, but the House of Representatives passed a bill called the African Growth and Opportunity Act. It has nothing to do with the Caribbean. That bill was sent to the Senate, and the Senate decided to add to its version of what we call AGOA, the African Growth Bill, Caribbean Basin Trade Enhancement Act. Now, the Senate Africa bill is different from the House bill, and the House has never passed the Caribbean Basin Expansion Bill. So what happened now is that House and Senate conferees are attempting to reconcile the difference between the House and Senate Africa bills and trying to craft a CBI bill.
At the same time?
At the same time,
yeah.
together in one package. So far they are stuck enough that the House will not appoint its official conferees, because once they do that, then they have to start moving on the bill. They're stuck, and they may never come unstuck.
What is the bone of contention? Is it with the Caribbean aspect of the bill or the African aspect, or is it both?
The major bone of contention publicly has to do with whose textiles go into the finished product for both areas, both Africa and the Caribbean. Under the House-passed bill, the textiles can come from anywhere in the world. The only requirement is that 20% of the value of the finished good must be from sub-Saharan Africa.
And the Caribbean?
No, we're just talking Africa now. The Senate bill, both the African part and the Caribbean part, require the use of U.S. thread, yarn, and fabric. So the cloth under the Senate version, and the thread to sew it together, and the yarn that goes into the cloth must come from the United States, go to the Caribbean or to Africa, be made into clothing, and then sent back here.
So why is the Congress against that?
Well, the House is against that
the House.
Yeah, for a couple of reasons. One is that they contend that nobody will use the bill, particularly with respect to Africa, if you require U.S. fabric, because it's not economical to ship fabric across to Africa and then bring it back. Another contention by some advocates of the Africa bill is that the textile industry has much more value to an area, is much more useful in development than the apparel industry. And if you require U.S. fabric, you will not develop a textile industry in Africa or in the Caribbean. So that's that difference. There are other differences.
But I also was informed that one of the bones of contention is that America's textile wants to compete with the Far East textile. And the view is that if you have enough inputs, like raw materials from the United States, into the Caribbean assembly system and production, then they will be in a more competitive basis, the Caribbean, hopefully, against the Far East.
I don't see that happening.
The other thing is they are asking also is that with regard to Africa, that Africans are not sufficiently skilled, they say, and that they may be importing Chinese workers. Is that so?
Well, it has nothing to do with skilled. There is a clothing industry in most countries in sub-Saharan Africa. It's not huge, but it's there. It's a question of the Chinese government having more workers than they can keep busy, and for some reason, other countries being willing to let those workers come in and take jobs. So that in Mauritius in particular, this is the most prominent example and the one their own government acknowledges, there are somewhere in excess of 5,000 Chinese workers populating the apparel industry. Yes. Our position is if we have a bill to make Africa grow, then it should only apply if African workers are being used and if African-owned factories are being used and more than 20% African input is being used. Our goal is not to hurt Africa or to hurt the Caribbean. It is to build up the workers in those countries so that they become consumers for our products. And the way both of these bills are written, as far as we're concerned, that will not happen.
Robert, this bill also speaks or places the Caribbean bill in the context of preparing the Caribbean to enter the FTAA, the Free Trade Area of the Americas. So it seems that one of the arguments is not just merely to create more employment in the Caribbean, but also to prepare us for 2005 when hopefully, according to the governments of the region, the entire Americas will become a free trade area like the European community. What is your view on this?
Well, there are two problems with that argument. First of all, NAFTA is not just a free trade agreement. It's a trade and investment agreement. And it's going to be used to not only move textile and apparel jobs to Central America if it succeeds, that is, if the FTAA model succeeds. It's also going to be used to pry open these markets. And we saw in Mexico under NAFTA this process of prying open the market, particularly for grains and other agricultural products, led to tremendous disruption within Mexico. So we had a huge surge of corn imports into Mexico after NAFTA took effect. That led to a tremendous out-migration from farms, subsistence farmers, into the cities. And that had a tremendous depressing effect on wages in Mexico. So real wages in Mexico are now about more than 20% below where they were before NAFTA went into effect. So one concern I have is that NAFTA will lead to this kind of economic destabilization in the Caribbean if we extend the NAFTA model to the Caribbean in 2005. The second problem is that we're setting the Caribbean up to fail. The key problem here is that in 2005 something else is going to happen as well. The world quotas on apparel imports are going to be eliminated. They're going to be phased out. And if China, we haven't talked about China, but if China is allowed into the WTO, they're going to become the new super competitor on the block. China has wages that are much lower than those in either Mexico or in the Caribbean. Wages in China average on the order of $1 a day. In Central America, you're looking at wages on the order of $5 a day. In Mexico, it might be more like $15 a day, $10 to $15 a day. So there's no way that apparel producers in either Mexico or the Caribbean are going to be able to compete with low-wage labor in China.
So we're coming back to the old problem that was in Seattle, core labor standards.
Absolutely.
These bills, both of these bills, but particularly the Caribbean bill, does it, both in the Senate and the House, does it address the question of core labor standards?
No. It applies the generalized system of preferences standard, GSP, which has covered this area for many years, and which says that a country must be taking steps to provide core labor standards.
Core labor standards, for the audience, is basically
the right to organize, bargain collectively, the right to be free of child labor, prison labor, and free from discrimination on the job. And in the United States version of the GSP, Generalized System of Preferences, it also includes the right to a living wage and to decent conditions of work.
Yes, because that is one of the serious problems in the Caribbean. The Caribbean, we have a problem where we don't earn the wages of the U.S., but we have to pay for goods and services at the price of the U.S.
That is a problem.
So there's a bit, and that is deepening poverty in the Caribbean.
And that is a problem that is not addressed by these bills. Senator Harkin, on the debate on this bill, described taking steps, as our government has enforced it, as taking baby steps count. So that as a country, for example, adopts a new labor law, that's considered a step. That would be a step if they enforced the labor law. But when they don't enforce the labor law, then you have to go back and file another complaint. And so far, I think you would agree that the countries, for the most part, particularly in the garment industry, in the Caribbean and Central America, workers do not enjoy decent working conditions and a good standard of living. And they don't have the right to form unions without retribution.
Well, one of the things that I think is very interesting is to find out which are the forces at work in the Congress. For example, let's take the House. Who are the lobbyists that are really saying that this bill must not go through, or in the conference, that they should not reach an agreement with the Senate? And who is for, who is against? And similarly in the Senate, who are the actors there right now?
Essentially, the retailers, the people who run stores, the importers of clothing, and the major companies that Rob mentioned are pushing for the bill.
Are pushing for the bill.
Yes,
and
because they will profit.
What are they
from it.
arguing? What are they saying? They're saying it's going to benefit the Caribbean?
Oh, sure.
And it's a win-win? Benefit America, benefit the Caribbean?
Right. And
Tell us a bit about their arguments. Let's say what they have to say about it.
Well, they say these are good jobs for the Caribbean, that because, well, they don't even want U.S. cloth. They say that it will make clothing less expensive for Americans to buy, and that's good for them.
Right.
The whole principle of free trade is being applied.
Right, which is nonsense, unfortunately. We do not have free trade. Free trade would take one piece of paper that would say no tariffs and no barriers to goods, so that everything moves freely. What we have are 10 and 20 and 1,000-page volumes that say this company gets this advantage and this group gets that advantage. It's regulated trade, but it's regulated in the interest of multinational corporations. It is not regulated to benefit workers or even consumers.
I see. Robert, I see also when you look at the bill that it's tied not just to trade. They speak about investment. They speak about an economic philosophy of the free market. Can you develop that a bit, the developmental aspect, the link between this bill as it is and the particular kind of economic and social model that they want to promote in the Caribbean, the bill aspires to promote?
At its most fundamental level, what this bill attempts to do is to implement what's known as the neoliberal economic model, the notion that the way to grow is to deregulate all of your markets and to grow through exports. And there are a couple of problems with that model. We've seen over the last few decades that as that model's been tried throughout Latin America and much of the developing world, we've seen that it's led to a tremendous growth in income inequality. In Mexico, for example, we now have 25 or 50 billionaires. They didn't used to have any at all before NAFTA. Now they have a huge crop of billionaires, small number though, and a tremendous increase of people living below the poverty level. Millions, tens of millions of people have been pushed below the poverty level in Mexico by the wage problems we talked about earlier. And so that's one of the consequences of this model of neoliberal economic development that we talk about. We've also seen a tremendous increase in instability. Mexico went through a huge financial crisis in 1994-95, about a year after they entered NAFTA. And in fact, we've published work by Professor Robert Blecker at American University that shows that this peso crisis was linked to the economic development strategy that was embedded in the NAFTA model. And once again, I think that kind of instability comes along with this model.
So implicit in this trade bill, if it were to be accepted by the Caribbean, is that you're not just buying one thing, you're buying many things.
That's correct.
It goes with a package.
That's right. And
of investment, developmental model, et cetera, et cetera.
That's right. And in fact, one of the things they're going to require, I know with respect to Africa, and I think with respect to the Caribbean too, and you know this probably better than I do, is that these countries also meet the restrictive conditions set by the IMF for certifying that they're following this kind of very conservative economic policy. That means opening up their capital markets, deregulating labor markets, deregulating import flows all across their economies, and I think that's going to simply contribute to the increase in inequality and the instability that we talked about earlier.
And there's another problem with building an economy based on exporting clothing to the United States. The market is just so big, and 160 or so countries around the world are already producing clothing for the U.S. market. We're not competing at the level of different quality. We're not competing at the level of better skill. We are competing to say who can pay the lowest wages, who can get that good to the United States the cheapest. And that is not a way to build people's income and to build them up. Countries have to start looking for something other than apparel to grow on.
But very briefly, how does, if this bill were to go through and be accepted and be passed, how will it affect American workers? Will you, very briefly, would you lose jobs?
Yes, no question that garment workers in the United States, and depending on the textile provisions, perhaps textile workers in the United States will lose jobs. And our two industries have lost 50% of their membership in 25 years. We've gone from 2.4 million workers in this country to 1.2 million and shrinking every month.
The other thing is people say that these kind of arguments are for isolating America, and it's a Buchanan kind of argument where you're talking, where Buchanan said, for example, that the bill is an assault weapon pointed at American workers. How do you, who are more progressive, more sensitive to Caribbean interests and so, how do you distinguish yourself from somebody like Mr. Buchanan?
It's a BB gun addressed at all workers. This is not designed to help Caribbean or Central American workers, and it will hurt American workers. One of the things that has happened under the existing CBI program is that jobs within the area covered by the bill have migrated from the countries with better working conditions to the countries with worse working conditions. Both Costa Rica and Jamaica, which generally respect trade union rights and have decent wages and working conditions, have lost apparel jobs, not to Mexico, but to El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua,
within
Guatemala.
the very Caribbean basin.
Yes, countries
because
that
they do not have trade union rights and so forth.
That's correct. They aren't allowed to exercise them. On paper they have them, but many countries in that area do not have a single trade union in their export processing zones.
In one sentence, Robert, what will happen with Caribbean future trade relations with the U.S. if this bill does not go through?
If this bill does not go through, I think it's going to force us to go back to the drawing board and develop a new strategy for trade and development for the region that will be good for workers in both countries. This deal is a lose-lose proposition for workers in both the U.S. and the Caribbean.
So you believe that Caribbean people should not support this bill?
Yes, I've talked to workers in Honduras, for example. I was there last spring and met with them, and I think after I explained it, I think that they understood that this was a very shaky foundation in which to develop.
So it's not a win-win situation in any case. Americans will lose, Caribbean people will lose. Who will benefit?
Multinational corporations, and basically US-based multinationals, although, again, if we permit fabric from anywhere in the world, then Chinese or Taiwanese-based multinationals will also get a piece of the action. But the workers in every country will not see the benefits.
Are you aware if Caribbean governments are supporting this bill?
Yes, and so is the U.S. government. Oh. But that doesn't reflect the views of the trade unions and the views of the people.
Well, we'll stay there for now, and on another occasion we have to continue with this subject because it's extremely complex. This has been a very insightful discussion. There is an urgent need for Caribbean Americans, be you from Nicaragua or Jamaica, to follow the debate and the ups and downs of this bill in Congress. It affects you here and affects our relatives back in our homelands. I am Paul, Nehru, Tennessee, for Carib Nation. Until next time, see you, man.
It's that time again when we shine the light on another bright spot in our community.
Hi, my name is Julio Novello, and I'm actually the GM for Electroworld, and it's one of the best places to work.
Electroworld is a communication company. We sell cell phones, prepaid cell phones. We do repairs to communication equipment, TVs, VCR, and computers. I was once a DC public school teacher, and I discovered there was kids walking the hall and didn't go to class, and I was a computer teacher there. So I stepped in and tried to get those hall walkers out the hall and tried to help them. Then I finally discovered that these kids take an interest in computer, which led me to go to different companies like NCR, SAIS, and get used computers and form partnership with them and get the kids involved. Not to my knowledge, know that these young minds were going to be managers today working for DOD, and one of them is now running the company of Electroworld.
Mr. Bailey has been like a role model to me. He has helped me out a lot, tremendously. I probably wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for him. Now I'm the general manager of Electroworld. I have a bachelor's degree in information systems. And to be honest, I credit him for all the things I have done in my life. Because if it wasn't for him or if it wasn't for Electroworld, I don't know honestly where I would be today.